I'm here today bringing greetings from all of the colleagues at the University of Minnesota and the Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Global Change, who've come to know our partnership, the partnership between our centers and universities over our more than 15 years of collaboration, which is kind of hard to believe. Over this time, at the heart of our partnership, we've worked together to enable fellows to travel between our centers and benefit from our distinct yet connected intellectual communities. We've also welcomed faculty visitors to both campuses, taught joint seminars, organized joint conferences and workshops, and developed community arts partnerships. And of course, the annual winter school that we have offered together with the partnership of the University of Fort Hare has played a key role in this partnership. I very much wish I were there with you in person, as I have been for many winter schools over the past decade, to enjoy the fellowship of gathering in person. The Winter School has provided an important point of connection among the scholars on our campuses, and we really look forward to being back with you in person again. We've managed to sustain our connections through the challenges of the pandemic, which I think is a testament to the strength of the community we've built together. This year's Winter School, like its predecessors, has again served as a generative space of sharing ideas and continuing to build an intellectual community. I want to express my sincere appreciation to Michelle, Heidi, Maurits, Ross, Lameez, and all of the other CHR colleagues who have made this winter school possible, and to all of the speakers and participants. I know just how much creative thought and labor goes into creating this special space. I would also like to take this opportunity to express my deep gratitude and appreciation to Premesh Lalu. At the risk of offering too much insight into my age and Premesh's, I have come to know Premesh over 25 years, since the time we met at the University of Minnesota as graduate students and fellows in what was then called the MacArthur Program on Global Change, Sustainability, and Justice. But it has been over the past decade that I have worked more closely with Premesh in the CHR-ICGC partnership in our roles as center directors, and come to know better his abilities as an intellectual and a creator and builder of humanities and arts programs, as well as his generosity as a host in Cape Town to me and all of our other Minnesota visitors. I won't recite his scholarly accomplishments, except to note that Premesh is an important thought leader and an influential voice in the global humanities, from whom I have learned a great deal. I feel fortunate to count him as a colleague and as a friend. From the perspective of the University of Minnesota, Premesh has been a generous partner in building our fellowship program, our joint curriculum, and our collaborative arts activities. His work, his own research, speaking, and writing, together with the scholarly and artistic collaborations he's developed, have really had a substantial impact on graduate education and research in the humanities and the critical social sciences at Minnesota. Our long-term partnership, supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, is one example of the lasting impact of his work. As I have suggested, our collaboration in research and graduate education and arts has led to the creation of a transnational scholarly community spanning our two locations and fostering the humanities and the humanistic social sciences in the work of emerging doctoral fellows and artists and established faculty members. The interactions in this community have profoundly shaped the work of a number of our ICGC affiliated scholars, students and faculty alike. Premesh's leadership in this partnership, as well as others with several institutions in various regions of the world, has shaped an innovative form of international collaboration in the humanities, driven by pressing contemporary political and social questions. And I have learned a great deal from and with Premesh as we have navigated the waters of international partnership building. One of the collaborative programs I have most enjoyed developing with Premesh is the Public Humanities Puppetry Partnership between the artists of Ukwanda and Handspring in Cape Town and Berrydale, and the Minneapolis-based In the Heart of the Beast Puppet and Mask Theater and May Day Parade and Festival. It was an exciting arts collaboration across distance and form, simultaneously innovative, generative, challenging in its practicalities, and joyful in its expression. And I very much have enjoyed working with you, Premesh, to build that and other programs together. Premesh, your colleagues and friends in Minnesota send to you our warmest wishes. While I will miss working with you on a regular basis, I look forward to continued connection and to seeing what comes next. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I wasn't expecting to say something at a formal winter school event. I thought standing around the fire, I'll be able to share a few words. So please excuse me for not having prepared because I wasn't anticipating being in the winter school myself. Let me say, you know, I like the way that you, from the humanities perspective, have the ability to express things. When I walked in, I heard Heidi say something about holding but not holding on. I'm not here to say farewell to Premesh or goodbye even. We are fortunate that we are holding as an institution, but we're not holding on to it. We feel privileged as a person, as an institution, that Premesh has been the founder director of the CHR. I feel privileged to have gotten to know him at a very different level on my return in 2014. And during those first few months of being Vice-Chancellor designate, I went around to different faculties. And I will never forget when I walked into the Faculty of Arts, into the executive committee. I thought I was being quite provocative because at the time and still there is in South Africa, as in the rest of the world, quite a conversation around the crisis in the humanities and the extent to which the prevailing frameworks of government and of business is driving university towards a more utilitarian mode of education, with the result that there, at that time at least, and maybe still, there was a real sense that the humanities as a discipline is in crisis, that is not receiving the necessary support financially and otherwise from key role players. So I thought I was going to be very provocative, and I said to the meeting, so tell me about the crisis in the humanities, since you are a humanities faculty. And I didn't expect the almost angry response from Premesh. What crisis? There's no crisis at UWC in the humanities. And his words proved to be right. From my time as a member of the arts faculty at UWC, I know what it means to be a humanities scholar, to work in sociology, in literature, in psychology, and we've always had a very, very, if I may say, kind of elitist academic approach to the study of those disciplines. And here I come face to face with the Humanities Center, which associates itself with things like handspring puppets. I remember at Brian's farewell, they had the wars. I found the Humanities Center that associates itself with community projects like Bever, which is very different from the concept of the elitist humanities academic. I'm fortunate that right from the outset, I found a staunch ally in Premesh with regards to my vision of being a multi-site campus. Our history of apartheid has isolated us in a certain location in Bellville, cut off from the most important arterial ways in the city, and we've set out to change that landscape. Today, we are situated at least 6 different sites in Cape Town. Our dentistry faculty is situated in 3 of those sites, Tygerberg, Red Cross and Mitchell's Plain. Our health sciences faculty is located right in the center of the Belleville CBD, and it is our deliberate attempt to change our location and to become an anchor institution in the greater city and in the province. And Premesh was a huge ally in that. I know there was a time when we were looking at the old Hewitt College as a possible extension of the Center for Humanities Research. That didn't work, but Premesh didn't give up. He eventually brought us an old rundown building in Woodstock. And for some reason, he persuaded me that humanities would be well situated right in the artistic center of Cape Town, which is Woodstock. I don't regret it because I think that the Great Moore building might represent one of the better investments when we look back at the history of the development of UWC. He has also brought us a partnership that is right at the beginning stages of flourishing, which is the partnership with Boschendal. And we envisage a partnership that will stretch across all disciplines in the university, from the science faculty. It will be agriculture, from the health sciences, the humanities, dentistry. It will be community outreach in the Dwas River area. And so we're very excited about that project. And then also the use of the facilities as you've just done. So in saying goodbye, but not farewell, I'm trying to pay homage to the role that Premesh played, not only with respect to humanities, but also within the larger university. And as he leaves, unfortunately, Heidi, he passes the baton on to you. Can I see your shoes, Premesh? You know, when I stepped into Brian's shoes, one of the questions that I was continuously asked is, how are you going to fold this man's shoes? Now, if you've seen Brian's shoes, you will understand my response. My response was, I will never be seen dead in Brian's shoes. But that wasn't meant literally. It was meant to suggest, Heidi, that Brian has played a significant role. He has chartered the university in such a way that we consider ourselves to be one of the research-intensive universities in South Africa. And it is up to me to find my own role that I want to play at the university. Similarly, I want to say to you, Heidi, Premesh has left us in a very, very good space with regard to the humanities. It is now your role to figure out what is the new direction that humanities and the Center for Humanities Research should take within UWC. And hopefully when Premesh comes back, we will have a CHR that retains its identity as Premesh and all of you have shaped it, but has also taken on an exciting and a new direction. Premesh, I'll be having, when are you leaving?
In a few months though.
Oh no, sorry, I was going to be in UAE in December, and I thought we were going to have lunch together. So we'll have lunch here. Okay. Thank you very much for you, Premesh. UWC thanks you for your service.
I first met Premesh when I joined the history department at UWC in July 1995. He was already known to me as one of the most provocative figures in a department that was doing revolutionary and quite disrespectful things with the discipline. The department had teams working on the People's History Project that later became the subject of self-critique. The department led shock troops of hundreds of undergraduate students to assail the Museum of Natural History's Bushman diorama, and subaltern studies had been put on the curriculum. At that time in the 90s, the South African social history paradigm reigned supreme, centered on figures like Charles van Onselen at Wits University, with a host of wannabe next generationers who wanted to stand on his big shoulders. When Premesh was finishing his MA thesis, a group known as the Troika, namely Gary Menkley, Leslie Witz, and Siraj Rasool, was beginning to seriously challenge the Rand-centric narrative of social and economic history centered on the mineral revolution built around Van Onselen and others, and to argue against an underlying episteme that masked its own vulgar empiricism. Among some of these colleagues, including Premesh, a certain 19th century mode of speech and vocabulary permeated the air, inspired by the heavyweight but flowery translations of German and Russian texts by Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky, and others, and inflicting daily commentaries on the post-apartheid. UWC, known as the intellectual home of the left under the courageous Jakes Gerwel, also accommodated many of Cape Town's political subcultures. This was in the wake of the student struggles of the 1980s, of which Premesh just spoke, which had radically shaped subjectivities and were shaped by them in turn, alongside the odd battle between self-identified Trotskyists and those castigated as Stalinists, with multiple permutations. I mention all this for two reasons, one being Premesh's abiding commitment to Athlone and the Cape Flats, where different schools and youth groupings had trampled on apartheid's classificatory categories, and which has left an invisible but indelible imprint in which he has paid a deep tribute to in his recent book, Double Futures. The second reason I mention all this is because of the radical student tradition of the Marxist reading groups, which would meet in different guises and even under various disguises during apartheid. This formation has been a very serious one and is the ancestor of the reading groups we have in the CHR. The reading group has been reborn many times, but continues to offer a training in intellectual rigor and those slow modes of reading that allow the philosophical and political undercurrents to surface, of which Maurits spoke so beautifully on Sunday. Thus, as some of us will remember, when Premesh returned from his first few years of PhD study at Minnesota, he launched a series of reading groups, starting with PostColonial Theory, which shifted into a question of the post-apartheid, aesthetic education, the technical becoming of the human, and so on, often underpinning the concept statements that have structured our winter schools over the years, as in Fragment and Form this year. And in the first few years, when Premesh took over the directorship of the Center for Humanities Research, from interim directors Leslie Witz and Siraj Rasool, this philosophical and theoretical bent was celebrated because it was widely agreed that UWC needed, I quote, a space for theory. And I sometimes think we need to remind everyone of this. But I want to go back to the early years when I knew Premesh. Last year, UWC celebrated its 60th birthday. It started out as a university designated for those officially classified as colored. One purpose it was made to serve was to train those administrators and petty bureaucrats who would govern their own people in certain parts of Belleville, for example, rather like a racialized template of indirect rule. Unless you obtained a permit to enroll at a white university which offered a bigger array of university courses and disciplines, the Bush College, as it was called, was your tertiary destination. UWC was one of those tertiary sites intended to serve as the dustbin of history. So unless you did something about it, or you were a white person, you would spend your life going from one dustbin to another. To its everlasting credit, many students and staff at UWC from the 1970s, possibly earlier, radicalized the campus to earn the moniker University of the Left. Unfortunately, the strategies of radical inclusion that were adopted were not deemed fiscally sustainable after the democratic transition in 1994. It became the University of the Leftovers. And this is what one placard stated in the protests of 1997, following the expulsion of a huge number of indebted students and the dismissal of 50 academics. Unlike the experience of other African countries when they put aside settler colonial rule and invest heavily in education, like Zimbabwe, which is where I come from, initially it seemed that this appeared to be a state which had abandoned its own citizens. But as we know, UWC has been very successfully rebuilding and reconstituting itself ever since. Thus, the 90s were troubled times, which also eventually saw problematic tertiary restructuring. However, in the history department, most staff were still, it's hard to believe, relatively young and obliged to take up leadership on all fronts because of the paucity of senior professorial staff. Now, maybe it was possible to do more at UWC because the stakes were not as high as at more prestigious academic institutions which had firmly established gerontocratic hierarchies. Until our enrollments dropped with the removal of history as a subject from school curricula, we taught immense numbers of students. First year regularly had maybe 1,200 students. Second year, 700 or 800, and third year, 300 to 400. These numbers were phenomenal, and they made teamwork essential. We also taught part-time classes for working people at night every second year, so we took it in turns. This meant you stayed on campus and would get home around 9 p.m., unless your classes were in the earliest night slot around 6 p.m. Now, in and around this time, Premesh embarked on his PhD program at the University of Minnesota on the MacArthur program, as Karen Brown has just mentioned, taking his family to Minneapolis, St. Paul for several years. Now, I remember before he left, Premesh came to my office and said to me that as someone who had done their PhD abroad, he wanted my advice. Should he go overseas to do his PhD? At the time, it was an important political point to commit to the African university, as many in the department did, though of course it never stopped anyone's imagination from going everywhere. I don't remember exactly what I said, but basically I told Premesh it was up to him, but he had nothing to lose and possibly a lot to gain. And in fact, he walked into an extraordinarily rich community of scholars in Minnesota that we would draw upon for years through our ongoing partnerships. John Maurits, Kadri Ismail, Ajay Scaria, Helena Poland McCormick, Karen Brown, Fernando Arenas, Nancy Luxon, and not forgetting through Maurits's period of study there, Cesare Casalino. Premesh came back to UWC from Minnesota to write his dissertation, and for several years, I think, was poised between our department and Minnesota, carrying some very difficult burdens. Like others in the history department, he faced an enormous teaching load. In particular, he took on the most important task in the first year. The policy in the department was to unmake the conservative notions of histories that the students entered the university with, namely that history is about events, about narratives, and rote learning bits of historiography that will get you through. And this historiography is often condescending and alienating, if not offensive. The history department tackled this problem primarily by the debate method, which cast the lecturers in the history department as impersonating their betters and acting out points of view and disagreements, and then asking the class to vote for the most convincing argument around a particular question. People even dressed up and arranged their hair especially. Any of us might be recruited also to just hide in the class and then suddenly erupt with a question or an attack from the point of view of some eminent person at war with so-and-so. The point was to unsettle the putative sacredness of the text, act out disagreement, and introduce a much wider analytical vocabulary. I remember playing Helen Bradford and launching a severe assault on Colin Bundy and Jeff Perez or something like that for their Anglo-centrism. It was all to bring social history crashing down with its underlying epistemological assumptions and masculine evidentiary discourse. This format and his own passion and force of intellect is where the genius of Premesh came into its own. Working off his own thinking on the figure of Hintsa and the 19th century history of the Eastern Cape, Premesh brought a philosophical critique of the colonial archive and Enlightenment reason right into the lecture hall. The intense debates on Hintsa's severed head and the currency of dreams and ancestors to redefine history had, I believe, an incalculable impact. In the face of huge numbers of first-year students, Premesh did not follow a route of making things easy and explaining historiography to help students just fulfill basic requirements. On the contrary, by grasping the most difficult questions, he tapped into students' own imaginations and awoke their potential, forcing them to challenge themselves into reaching for much more intellectually. Everything else, in fact, follows from that. And there are numerous brilliantly talented students who were recruited into postgraduate studies through Premesh's lively undergraduate interventions, and some of them are here. Premesh's refusal to dumb things down has made for an interesting problem space that I've sometimes been in a position to observe. Firstly, and unfortunately, many of his fellow academics have simply not been able to understand what Premesh says and writes. This is not confined to historians. This was explicitly stated by one very astute reviewer when Premesh applied for research rating with the NRF, and I was chair of the panel. And this reviewer wrote that some people disagree with or try to diminish Premesh from a position of incomprehension. And this has resulted in different itineraries for his publications. And it's an object lesson to us all to remain stubborn in the face of inappropriate criticism or reviews and to simply keep going. Furthermore, what do you do about the uncontainable thought of a Premesh and the students that he's aroused when we continue to exist in a highly uneven landscape of higher education where opportunity is continually truncated? A situation began to arise in the dustbin of history, as it were, where you either dig your feet in and change people's attitudes to UWC as a research university, or you throw in the towel and join a brain drain overseas or to those provincially minded institutions up the road that continually seek to provincialize UWC. It is to Premesh's everlasting credit, and for this we owe him an enormous debt, that he convinced a highly enlightened university leadership, first under Brian O'Connell, and then Tyrone Pretorius, with support from executive and institutional planning, that UWC and the humanities, that UWC must be recognized in the field of humanities research by the world, and that funders needed to shift from uniquely dispersing grotesque amounts into historically privileged institutions. And this effected a complete sea change. In an enormous set of efforts over the years, therefore, and starting from the modest base of Premesh as director and Lameez as financial administrator, two extraordinary people, we have seen the historical arrival of funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation that kickstarted and consolidated research programs and artistic platforms at the CHR. Also, UWC funding to extend staff positions to include Serene and Heidi Grunebaum, who is now director. NRF funding and co-funding, especially for the flagship in African critical humanities, that helps to support Rwanda artists, next generation scholars. NRF funding for the chair in visual history and theory, that I hold. Mellon funding for the chair in aesthetic theory and material performance, held by Jane Taylor, and the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences, NIH funding, all resulting in an exponential growth of the fellowship at the CHR. Now, I know I'm praising Premesh and a few, but it is also a massive collective effort. Now, this has been a long road. Before I was seconded to the CHR in 2016, Premesh, myself, and other colleagues and partners worked for years in very close collaboration around two projects that originally started with nothing, except original ideas from the students who taught or supervised. We used to run it, as we said, on tea money, which proves you can do anything. The first project was called More in the Everyday, which in some ways paralleled Heidi Grunebaum's doctoral work, also drew on doctoral work on nationalist struggles and liberation movements elsewhere in the continent, and the little acknowledged affects of disconnectedness felt by citizens. We developed a mode of serial workshops which also accommodated students wishing to talk in critical but safe ways about their archives. And this model was later carried over into another and more ambitious series called Love and Revolution, which had 4 iterations and whose book publication we are happy to say will shortly appear. Love and Revolution met in Cape Town, in Minneapolis, thanks to Helena Pola McCormick and colleagues, in Delhi, thanks to G. Arunima and the Nehru Memorial Library, and finally again in Cape Town. Now, I speak about these collaborations because they are about something very important, and that is the journeys that bring us together and which we do together, and which I hope, Premesh, we shall continue to engage in as you embark on your new journey to Sharjah. For us at UWC and CHR, there has been an amazing confluence of extraordinary people who continue to come together. Part of it originates in Premesh's time at Minnesota, and the strong friendships made there. And part of it, let me mention, from a special set of moments in Cairo, before, during, and after the Egyptian Revolution, where Martina Rika hosted multiple workshops at the American University of Cairo, where many of us went. And some of those we met there also flowed into our other multiple collaborations. So it's through Cairo that we ultimately find ourselves in Delhi for Love and Revolution. And many of the photos that I've been sharing with you here attest to the friendships and conversations that have thrived across continents. In some ways, these also feed into the tradition of winter schools through the invited speakers, and they help to bind UWC and Forterre and their partners together and with the emergence of new cohorts of postgraduates and postdoctoral fellows, this has hopefully become an intergenerational gift. In the introduction to Love and Revolution, to appear soon, Premesh argues that the post-colony and the post-apartheid, as new nations, have failed to carry the more profound sensibilities that marked the movements ushering in change. Politics has become increasingly separated from the senses, with the emphasis on state formation, new nation. Now, Premesh's commitment to the arts and artists, and especially the puppet, which he was always afraid John Mowat would attack. Premesh's commitment to getting institutions to support them arises from this perception of the technicist direction of developmentalism, nationalism, and even socialism, where something important drops off and becomes attenuated. I quote Premesh: "The problematic posed by the aesthetic," he says, "was and is happening all around those caught up in these politics, literally bombarding them. For us here in Southern Africa, the turn to aesthetics is necessary because these are literally some of the last remaining resources when, as Premesh puts it, nationalism turns ugly." So, Premesh, let us see what aesthetic, political, and philosophical resources you will tap into in your future position at the African Institute in Sharjah. We are going to miss you very badly. We wish you well. Au revoir, dear Premesh.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lameez, Lalkhen, the Administrator at the Center for Humanities Research. I feel a bit emotional after Patricia's talk, but I feel very honored to have worked with Premesh. At the stage, it was just the two of us. And this man's passion was so great that I thought, how am I going to work with this man? I didn't even have a degree, so I'm so sorry, it's so emotional. But Premesh is such a wonderful person that he inspires everybody. It's just, that's the way he is. He makes everybody feel important. And that was the passion that I picked up from Premesh. I didn't have a degree, and I knew if I'm going to work with this man, I need to understand the students. Premesh's passion was always about the students. You would find him walking with the students, talking to the students, and the passion he had to put you on the scene, to create this beauty that he wanted for all the students to see that the place that they come to study is of great importance. And I just kept on every day telling myself, Lord, give me the strength to walk with this man because he's a giant. And I'm just this, I don't even have a degree. In the time that Premesh was building the Center for Humanities Research, I started my first degree. And I couldn't do classes like other administrators when they were doing the degrees during the course of the day because there was too many things to do, too much. So it meant working hard with Premesh during the day, not going to my classes, getting home at 10 because I was at the lift club, and my husband had to make sure that the children get home. So we get home at 10 o'clock at night, and then the next day we're back, 6 o'clock I'm back at the office. And at the stage, it was so demanding that I was calling my husband Premesh because and I remember my daughter saying to me, "Mommy, why are you calling Daddy Premesh?" But it was sleep-leaving. It was just Premesh because I had to keep up with him, you know. And I remember when I graduated the afternoon, I said to Premesh, can I take off the afternoon just to go and get done for the graduation? And that afternoon, I just cried because it reflected how much Premesh had helped me through this. And in my second year of my studies, I approached my husband and I said, don't you also want to go study at the university? So it was myself and my husband both doing our degree, and Premesh was so supportive. I could say to my husband, come and sit in my office work, Premesh is okay with it. And as the time was growing, the center was growing, and I as an individual was growing with skills that I could help other administrators. They would come to me and say, how do you people do this? How did you get it right? Because with Premesh, the word no didn't exist. I couldn't say, Premesh, I can't do this. I had to find ways to make it happen. And every time the projects grew, the more projects we got, the more the money came, the more it became more intense and intense. And as the more the project grew, the more people we got. And the team just became greater than I could ever imagine. It was Serene, it was Heidi, Michelle, Ross, Maurits, Aiden, Walton. The amount of people that Premesh drew, the energy, it was marvelous. It was, I didn't even sometimes want to go home. It was just so beautiful. I was growing as an individual with this giant next to me, And Premesh, I could never thank you enough. I am deeply honored by having this opportunity. So thank you, Premesh, because my skills, my career has improved in a way that I don't think any other administrator at university can say. You've really not just seen me as an administrator, but it was greater than that. In full circle in 2015, I hosted an international conference, which I was part of the Women in Black South Africa. All my skills that I developed at the Center for Humanities Research came in full circle. All the professors, all the students that I've worked with through Premesh, they all came to the conference and they all just put the university on a level that I could not comprehend when I started with Premesh. So I don't think anybody could understand what I'm feeling, because it's not just about Premesh and about me, but it's greater than we can ever imagine. And the students that still send to me WhatsApp and says, you and Premesh, you are marvelous. I can't imagine, because academically Premesh was there to lift them. I don't know how many IOUs letters I could type up, because Premesh was just borrowing students' money and he couldn't recall how much money he was giving to everybody. And I just said, stop the technical letters and making everybody sign and say, come to me when you need to pay Premesh, because half of the time, no, he was so busy. But it's that kind of intensity relationship that somebody like Premesh would take you and he would mold you and he would shape you without you realizing what is taking place in your life. And we got Premesh got a message from one of the students, and he thanked Premesh and myself for the involvement, because Premesh would help him along. And at the back, they would call me Mama Lameez, because I would tell them, don't give up, keep on going. Premesh got your back, don't worry. If you struggle, just go to Premesh and I'll be here to help you along. And that is what we both, and our vision was always to put the university on that level. That when academics and students came in touch with the Center for Humanities Research at the University of the Western Cape, they would leave feeling an amazing journey at the hand of us. Not just coming for lectures. We always do things out of the box. If it means driving for a rice maker, driving to find a rice maker for Kadri. We went the extra mile to make every person that touched our center special. And every single one had to be special. Students, professors, academic, doesn't matter who you are that walked into our center. They had to leave the university knowing that they were remarkable, they were special. And this was the passion that Premesh and I had from the word go. I didn't see his vision. It all unfolded as we moved along, and it became greater than we both imagined it to be. But it's a journey, Premesh. I said to you, I can write a book. I can write a book about our journey. The administrator and the director.
So I asked Heidi if I could say a couple of words. We know that this isn't farewell. We already have our images of you riding in the desert with on a camel, which will keep us the Oriental from it. That's our friend Kadri always used to say to us, we critique essentialism and we tear down these concepts, but there's also a certain truth to certain generalizations. One of the truths that Premesh ruptured for me when I first encountered him in 2003 as a third-year student was this idea that professors have knowledge and one day we might attain it. And what I mean by that is that Premesh would say, I've read this book and it taught me all these things. I studied with John Mowat and that's why I know this. And so you must go study with John or with Kadri. It was a generosity of an itinerary of thought, which is what he's kind of made available through the. Now, Lameez, you're making me emotional. which Premesh made available through the center, through the program for the study of humanities in Africa, and then, which Heidi and I were both fellows in at one point. It's that invitation into the itinerary of thought, into learning, into the humility of being able to say, I don't actually understand this word. Let's read it together, and you learn in that moment. And one of the ways that was replicated in the center was in the reading program, insisting that there are postdocs, doctoral, masters, honors students, everyone is in together. This is something that he inherited also from the history department, but it is something that Premesh really embodied. So I just wanted to mark that and to mark that generosity. As we say, good luck on the next step of your journey. As Kadri would say, post-class.
Meeting face to face for the first time in 20 months in many instances, and amidst the loss, the despair, the uncertainty, it's such a layered moment, Premesh. And you were the internal examiner for my PhD, and you wanted to know if my negativism was Derrida's negativism or Adorno's negativism in your examiner's report. I'm still answering. It's been very difficult to formulate a response to, or a kind of united collective response. And so there isn't a card, Premesh, because we have different voices. And part of the plurality of thought, which we kind of bring to texts that we share in common, and to predicaments that not only do we share in common, but enfold us all, if unevenly and differently, is the different register of our voices. And there isn't a card, there isn't one voice of the CHR to say, we hold you, but we don't hold on to, and that our relationship with you institutionally will shift over the next few years. When we thought what to buy you, we thought it was a moral quandary, because to buy alcohol in this city is not an innocent act.
Yeah.
It's not an innocent gesture. It's not neutral. And it is one, in a way, like Sibongile's question this morning, it's a gesture that's embedded in a kind of invisible structural historicity that evades analytical discourse. And that's why I think the aesthetic is so powerful, because it asks us to think into a problematic or a predicament or the violence of a gesture like buying alcohol as a gift, without being didactic. There's a generosity and a hospitality in the arts and in the aesthetic, but also in the collective endeavor of study, in the way that Premesh has and our colleagues have modeled for us over the years through the CHR. I'm not here to, I want to stay with the problematic gesture of a gift of alcohol and turn to Seamus Heaney, who is an inspiring, how does one call, is it a pedagogue, the one who walks with? So if Seamus Heaney is your pedagogue, the poem, the gift that we give you from the CHR is the gift that in Irish language is called the water of life, Iscabaha, which was anglicized into, the Isca was anglicized into whiskey. And as you pointed to us many times, the colonial and the post-colonial condition doesn't only come from those geographies that we think we know. And often we learn more about the geographies and histories we think we know when we look to those predicaments that come from the places we don't expect, or we're not necessarily open to receiving. And so the end of a poem of Seamus Heaney called Digging. Heaney as your walking partner, as your thinking partner, as your pedagogue and poet, returns often around the problematic of violence, history, erasure, and the deferral of justice. And as you say, the senile old gerontologist in the USA has kind of taken that away from us for now. So digging angles us towards Premesh, not only Premesh the intellectual, Premesh the thinker, and Premesh the pedagogue, the one who accompanies his students. It also speaks to Premesh as a person, as a self-identifying man in this revolting city. And to the memory of your father, Premesh, who has never been far from our intellectual conversations. And because we unfolded by the histories and predicaments and contemporary times that shape us unevenly and differently, the intergenerational question can't be thought without us, even if we don't do it collectively, speaking to our lineages, which are riven with so much unspoken and often unthought and unprocessed and unmetabolized kind of affective energy and force. And Let me turn to Heini for now. He says it way better than me, and then I would like to hand you, if you would like an opportunity to respond, or if you'd just like to go and drink. I see that the Director of Institutional Planning, Barry Poppas, has joined us too, Umesh Bawa from International Relations. We do also want to celebrate even as we, but you know, the opening lines of digging as follows. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. And he's not celebrating violence. He's understanding the fragmentational power, how we can undo the apparatus of ideology and of politics and of governmentality that torment us. And the pen has the power to do that. And it's a power that is homeopathic. It can often, we often caught in the line of fire, so to speak. And I'm sorry, Lameez, as the convener of the Women in Black Conference, which is an anti-war formation and takes very powerful criticism of militarism. I'm sorry to use militaristic metaphors, but there is something in the cautioning of danger, the explosive power of thought when expressed through the pen and through the scholarship that emerges from the pen. So the squat pen rests snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound. When the spade sinks into gravelly ground, my father digging. I look down till his straining run among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Turner's Bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle, called Stumperhood paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. Premesh, keep digging. And what I can commit to is that you're digging and tunneling and burrowing to find the spaces where we can invent and experiment and never stop trying with our minds and our senses to attempt to undo the monstrosity of apartheid that has taken new forms in this global neoliberal moment. We will continue to do, and we'll do it with you, even if you're in the desert.